Iowa Senator-elect Claire Chelsea from West Des Moines, Iowa Representative-elect Karen Derry from Johnston, Iowa Representative-elect Jennifer Confirst from Windsor Heights, Iowa Representative-elect Heather Matson from Ankeny, Iowa Representative-elect Kristen Sunday from West Des Moines, Secretary of State candidate Deidre Jagier from Des Moines, and Iowa Senate District candidate Amber Gustafson from Ankeny. And will you all please also give a welcome to U.S. Senator from Massachusetts, Elizabeth Warren. We put you in the middle.
Okay.
And I'm going to move to this end out of the way.
Okay. Try not to fall.
So, starting with Senator Warren, and then the rest of the panel. Was running for political office the first thing you did in the community service world, or were you involved in other ways prior to that? And I also want to ask something else. What was the first office you ran for, and what motivated you to run?
Oh, wow, what a great question. So let me start just by saying thank you to everybody who's here. The rest of America is counting on Iowa to get this right. So it takes a lot of people who are engaged. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. I also don't ordinarily sound like this, but I spent the holidays with grandchildren, also known as little petri dishes, and ended up with a cold. So I will do my best to croak through this. I am probably the most unlikely senator you will find, and certainly unlikely to do something here in Iowa. I grew up in a paycheck-to-paycheck family in Oklahoma. I'm the baby, the youngest. All three of my older brothers joined the military. That was their ticket to the middle class. I wanted to go to college. That was I didn't want to go to college. I wanted to be a teacher, and that meant I had to go to college. I spent all of my early years just trying to pull it together. I got a scholarship, headed off to college. I fell in love, dropped out of school, and got married, found a commuter college. And for $50 a semester, that's how I ended up getting a college diploma and a chance to be a public school teacher. My life was pretty bumpy. I ended up with babies. I decided to do the craziest thing in America for somebody like me and how I'd grown up. I decided to go to law school. And I had a baby. I ended up with another baby on the way while I'm in law school. And all of this was just trying to build a life. I never thought that I was going to end up in elected office. I became a college professor, and all of my life circled around one central issue: what's happening to America's working families? Why is the path getting so much rockier for people who work hard, who play by the rules? Why are we crushing an entire generation in student loan debt? Why is America getting richer and richer and richer? And it is, by every indication. But all of that money is going to the top and not going to most of America: upper middle class, working poor, and poor. So that caused me, you asked how I ended up in public service. It was basically the big crash. And when the big crash came in 2008, I got a call from Harry Reid, who was then the leader of the Senate. Now, this tells you how politically astute I was. I was at home. I was about to have a dinner for a bunch of my students. The barbecue had just been delivered. the phone rings, and this man says, "Hi, I'm Harry Reid." And I said, "Who?" He wanted me to come to Washington to try to put a little accountability into the bank bailout. And I said, "Yes, sir." I pack up and go. I then got into the fight to build a consumer agency and help get that through Congress. We didn't have any group to fight for this. There was no money on our side. The banks were spending $1 million a day for over a year. Think about that. To lobby against the consumer agency and the other financial reforms. But I just got a bunch of people organized, and a lot of people jumped in, and that's how we ended up with a consumer agency. And then President Obama asked me to come and set it up. And then you'll love this. Do you remember pre-approved credit cards? You remember those? I am, I think, America's first pre-rejected nominee. Before President Obama could send my name over to the Senate, the Republicans sent a letter over saying, "We will never confirm that woman." So I went back to Massachusetts, 100% ready to go back into teaching. That's my job. And I started getting these calls, and it's relevant for right now. Some people would say, "Elizabeth, you should run against a guy with a 65% approval rating and $10 million in the bank." And some of them said, "You have another job anyway, it won't hurt. You should run." But there were a lot of people who called me and said, "Elizabeth, I love you, but you need to understand, if you jump in this race, Massachusetts will not elect a woman to the United States Senate." Yeah, that was 2011. In Massachusetts. But it happened to be right. A woman had lost in the cycle before, and it was almost as if folks were saying, "Hey, we tried that. It didn't work. So come back in a generation or two, women, and we'll see if we can try this again." But they said they won't do it. And of course, you can imagine how that made me feel. And that was, I'm in. But here was the deal. I jumped in that race. That was my first race for elected office. It was 7 years ago now. Not knowing what it was going to be like. I just really didn't. I hadn't been active in electoral politics. But the most astonishing part of it was that after I said, "I'm going to do this," how many women just came off the benches, out of the woodwork, to say, "Girl, you take that part and we'll do everything else." And so they volunteered, they knocked on doors, they organized, they collected signatures, they collected money, and we became a force. I went from 35 points down to beating that guy by 7.5 points. That's what we do together.
That's terrific. Inspiration also here in Iowa. Claire, start off.
Education was my inspiration all the way. I was sitting at my dining room table, and Governor Branstad vetoed a $56 million education appropriation in July 3rd, 2015. And my husband looked at me from across the room and he said, "Oh God, what's happening?" I said, "Oh, I'm going to run for office. No big deal." So no, it motivated me. Anger really motivated me. Just like, this is wrong and I need to do something about it. And then I lost that race, but then in 2018 I decided to try it again, and it worked.
And Karen decided right next to you, next door, that she was going to run too.
I did. Like so many other people after the November 2016 election, I was disappointed, to put it mildly. And I realized, frankly, that I'd been complacent and that I no longer had the luxury to be complacent. Similar to Senator Warren, I did go to law school when I was a non-traditional student. I was 41 when I started. Our youngest was 2 at the time, so I understand what it's like to be a non-traditional student. As far as being involved with other things before I ran, I never thought I'd run for office. I'd served on a couple different boards, the Central Iowa AIDS Project, the Primary Health Care Board, but never ran for office before, and I was just frustrated with what's going on, decided I wasn't going to let them have my state, not without a fight, and had an amazing group of volunteers who stepped up and said, not only you should run, but we'll help you.
Yes.
And that made all the difference.
Go, Jennifer.
Okay, so my first ever race was for nursery school board president, and I was unopposed, most decidedly unopposed. Anybody who's ever served in that role knows there is not a race to do that job. And then I was PTA president too, so again, unopposed. But, and then so that was really what I did. I got involved in my kids' schools. That's where I was involved from when they were 2 on, and I loved it. And then the same day Claire was deciding, I was deciding. The same thing prompted me to want to run. It was the veto of the education one-time funding. It was ridiculous. It was cynical. It was a lie. It was based on a lie. And so I got fired up to run, and then I lost, and it was super embarrassing and awful. And then I realized that next February that it wasn't about me, that it was about the people that I could try to help. And it was the fact that other women and young women had come to me and said, thanks for trying. I hope you'll try again. And that's when I realized I can take this embarrassment. What could be worse? I already lost. So why don't I try again? And then my opponent ran to redder pastures, and it became a completely different race. And I won. And it was a great year. And I would say this is a great start.
Yes.
Okay, Heather, here we go.
All right, well, first off, I have to say welcome everyone to House District 38, if you did not realize it. So I am very, very proud to represent this district, and I'm so thrilled to welcome all of you here, and especially welcome Senator Warren here. My background's actually in public policy and advocacy, and so I've worked on a lot of other people's campaigns, and I have a master's degree in legislative affairs, and so I actually decided to, the first time I ran was for this seat in 2016, and I had gotten in March of 2015, when people are like, why are you even thinking about this right now? Like, legislative session was going on, no one had any interest in talking to me, and I had gotten to the point where I had been doing a lot of volunteer work on things like I was the board chair for Planned Parenthood Voters of Iowa. I had been the vice chair of the Iowa Democratic Party. And so it was very natural for me to do something like this. And I just, quite frankly, was just kind of sick of how I felt like I was being represented. And that I felt like the people in my community weren't being as well represented as they could be. And I felt like, well, I can do this job. So, or at least as well as it's being done right now, and hopefully better. So, like Jennifer and Claire, we all ran in 2016, and as everyone knows, it was not a great election night for most of us. Yeah, and like Jennifer, I felt embarrassed and frustrated that I wasn't able to do it, especially after having campaigned for so long, and really took a step back to think about is this the right thing for me to do? Am I the right person for this district? Is it someone else entirely? And after taking about 10, 11 months to think about it, it's like, I think I am the right person for this district. And I think that a second time around is worth trying. Because, like Jennifer said, this isn't about me. And it's not about any of us, who are really up here on the stage. It's about what can we hope to and work to accomplish for the benefit of the people that we represent. And so that was why I decided to do it again a second time, and I'm so glad that I did. And it is because of so many of you who are in the room, and the women in particular who stepped up to be there to do things like drive me when I was knocking doors, especially in the winter. And also, I have 9-year-old twins. So having little kids at home, I can't just, leave them, right? And go out and do other things. So friends and neighbors who would step up to just watch my kids after school so I could get out and knock doors at 4 instead of having to wait for my husband to get home from work. So all of those things, it really makes a world of difference.
I've probably known Kristen the longest of all of you, even though I've known most of you for quite a while. But it was really exciting to see this first-timer win, specifically for me. So, Kristen?
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, over the years, I volunteered at my son's school. I did volunteer work for the Arthritis Foundation, which was a little self-serving because I have rheumatoid arthritis, and so I cared about finding a cure and research. But what really got me on the path to this recent election was the time that I spent as a foster parent. It opened my eyes to how much your childhood really impacts who you become as an adult. And I had the benefit of a wonderful childhood, and I think my son has the benefit of a great childhood, but not every kid in Iowa does. And we need to make sure that we're investing in those kids, all Iowa kids. Yeah. And I saw the Medicaid system not work for one of our foster kids. I saw that, they just didn't have the same kinds of resources and opportunities that my son did. And so I was asked to run. I'd never thought about it, never even crossed my mind. Someone asked me, and after a couple days of thinking, no, not me, the idea got stuck in my head, and I realized, well, why not me? I've seen these problems up close. I care. And also, I'm tired of the tone today. I'm the one married to a Republican. I'm sure you got to hear that over and over and over in the TV ads. But if I can get along with him at home and we can find common ground and we can work it out and compromise, all of us can. If we start looking at each other as Iowans rather than Democrats and Republicans first. And I really believe in that. And I want to make that happen in our government. And so that's why I decided to run.
Okay, Deidre, you did a remarkable job. Tell us about your experience.
Well, I think it's very consistent with what Kirsten just said. It was really about my upbringing. My parents were the type of parents that would drag me to women's correctional facilities to volunteer, nursing homes. My grandma, some of you all know, was elections commissioner in Mississippi, and so she forced me to knock on doors and get people engaged in the voter process. And all of that was to make me this public servant that didn't necessarily have to have a title to do the work, but was indebted to the community in which she lived. And so that is why I decided to run for this amazing role called Secretary of State. And even though we didn't quite get it, the work is not done. And so for each and every one of you all who are parents out here who brought your children, who are engaging your children, thank you. Thank you so much, because you are sowing the seeds of hope in each and every one of their lives. Had I not had parents that had done that for me, I probably wouldn't be sitting here right now.
And what's really amazing to me is that Amber decided to take on the majority leader of the Iowa Senate in Ankeny.
Well, I tell you what, if you're gonna do it, you might as well go big, right? I love to hear what Deidre had to say because my two daughters are here. They're 12 and 9, and I hope they were listening because all those things that we do, girls, they matter. Especially if they ever grow up to be as amazing as Deidre. That would be quite an accomplishment. So thank you so much to everybody who's here today. We're talking about campaigns, and I'm looking out here and I'm seeing all the folks that volunteered and helped in so many amazing ways for Heather and I and all of us up here on the stage, and we wouldn't be here without you. I have to tell you specifically, there are 3 women on this stage. I would not be here if they had not done what they did, and that's Claire and Heather and Jennifer, because as the Iowa chapter leader for Moms Demand Action, I got to volunteer on their campaigns and help work with them and got to meet them and see that politicians are people. Number one, there's nothing special about politicians, right? Right? Like we put our pants on one leg at a time, just like everyone else. And so I realized that as I watched these women not only run and do such an incredible job in 2016, that I could do it, but that even if the outcome wasn't what you hoped for, that you weren't going to shrivel up and die, that you could continue to go on. And whatever that you do next, that can be very, very powerful. I think the moment that I decided to run for office was December 14th, 2012. I didn't know in that moment that I had decided to run for office, but I knew that I would do anything that it took within my power to make sure that 20 first graders and 6 educators would never be gunned down in a school again. And as I began my work with Moms Demand Action, again, I began to meet more lawmakers and politicians, and I began to realize this is doable. And you know what? The Titanic sunk, you know? There is no politician too big to run against, okay? So if you're out there and you're in the PTO, because I was PTO president too. What? That's my first elected office. So if you're serving on PTO, or you're on preschool board, or you're involved in your church, or you're feeding people that are hungry, or you are helping people that need help, think about this. Consider doing this. Everything from school board all the way up to president, because every one of us has something to contribute. And I know a lot of women that are playing small right now that could be playing so big. And I see those faces in this crowd right now. So think about it. You can definitely do it.
Oh, I like seeing these faces. And that tells you something about what you all could do, either as volunteers, supporters, or as active elected officials as well. So let's move to another question. But before we do that, I'd like to also welcome and thank Christy Vilsack for being here today. Shout out. And I also see somebody else in the audience that I'd like to shout out to, and that's the head of our Iowa Democrat Students Group, Olivia Habing. It's good to have you here. Anybody else? Any other elected officials that I may have missed?
Jody, Lori.
I can't see. Oh, Lori Lovestad from the school board here in Ankeny. Hi, Lori. Good to have you here.
I just want to say that Lori Lovestad, president of the school board, and Heather Mattson and I all serve together on the same PTO. Just saying.
PTO is obviously your ticket to the
Yep.
top.
Yep.
And we have 4 open seats in Ankeny this year.
The school board, yeah.
So anyway, so let's get on with this. I want to ask you now, and talk amongst yourselves if you'd like to, what was the most, in the 2018 election, what was the thing that surprised you the most? Senator Warren, you want to start?
It was the women. I knew it was there, but I didn't know how big it was. It was the women who came off the sidelines and ran, which is dang tough. But let's face it, no one would have won if it hadn't been for all the other women who had never been involved in politics or never at that level, and who said, I am part of this. I will make my voice heard in Washington. I will make my voice heard at the State House. I will make my voice heard at the county level. I believe it was a transformative moment in America. And I watch it, I date it from the Women's March. That the day after the inauguration, I always think of this, the biggest protest rally in the history of the world. And it didn't just happen in Washington or Washington and New York and San Francisco. It happened in little towns and cities all across America and even around the world. It was democracy reinventing itself. And I watched the pundits, who, by the way, are so smart, say, oh yeah, they're here now, but will they be here in a month? And the answer was, uh-huh. Will they be here in 6 months? And the answer was, oh yeah. Will they be here in a year? Oh, yes, they're here. That it continued to grow. The march was not the apex. The march was the beginning. And more and more and more people came in, women, friends of women, who said, I'm going to make my voice heard. And they brought their sisters, and they brought their moms, and they brought their kids, and they brought their brothers. This is an extraordinary moment in American history. It is a moment when our country faces great danger, but it is also a moment when democracy itself is rebuilding, is strengthening, and is becoming the kind of representative government we need in the 21st century. I love it.
Shout out. I wanna
Claire.
give a shout out into everyone in this room and everyone across the state of Iowa. I heard this over and over. I'm not going to let what happened to us in 2016 happen again. So I'm getting off the couch, I'm making my phone calls, I'm door knocking, I'm writing you a check, and then what else do you need? Before it was just kind of, well, just another election, la la la. You know, and this time it really felt different.
Anybody else? Jennifer.
I can tell you the least inspiring moment, trust me, I'm getting to the best, was the day that I went to a gentleman's door and knocked on the door and handed him my literature, and he said, oh, I don't like her. And I said, oh, that's me, thank you. And I said, well, can I ask why? I don't know why I said that. I should have just cried and left. And he said, oh, I just don't think women belong up there. I have his address. No. And I left like, wow, this is not going to happen again. Oh my gosh, it kind of, I realized, oh my gosh, this is over. And then the next door, everyone, the next door was a woman who was teary because she was so proud. She had not been able to vote. This is a true story. I can give you her address too. She grew up not with family who couldn't vote. And she was so proud to vote for a woman. She was, I'm not going to give her age, but it was not young. And she was so proud to vote for a woman. And she said, I did last time, and this time I'm going to, but there are others with me this time. And it meant so much. So you know what? That guy, that's fine, but I'm up there now. So I guess it worked out.
Heather.
I had a lot of moments knocking doors, which those of you who know me or who have knocked doors with me know that I love knocking doors. I am that crazy person. I love it. And so you'll have any number of different conversations with people, some that are not great, some that are amazing. And one moment when I knew things were really different this time around was I was knocking in Ankeny, and I look at my list and I was like, okay, an older couple, Republicans, it's Persuasion Universe. This should be interesting. I open the door, the woman sees me and she goes, oh, you're the woman I'm voting for. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. Do you want to know anything about me first? like, just take it and run. No, but we had a lovely conversation, and she was really excited. And she was also, mentioning so many others who were going to be doing the same. And the other thing that I just wanted to mention, too, that was just so different this time around, certainly it's volunteers as a whole. It was such a different thing. But women in particular who had been relatively engaged when I ran the first time, that came up to me afterwards and just said, I wish I had done more. And they said, if you run again, I promise that I will. And you're never really sure how to take that as a candidate because you're like, life gets in the way. We're busy people, right? And people have the best of intentions of all of the things that they say that they want to do, and they really want to do them, but can't always do them. And there are a couple women in particular who just embraced that and did things they would have never, ever done. Friends that I convinced them to knock doors and then became crazy door knocking lovers just like me, and convinced other people to do it. Friends who, a friend that organized a phone bank starting in July that we did every Monday. And she had a mission that she said, we're going to get people in the door to write postcards, and we'll get some people in the door that'll, that just, they feel like they can't talk to anybody, but they'll also be in there listening to people making calls. And they'll be in there when people are coming back from door knocking. And they'll slowly get more comfortable with it. And what do you know? There is a woman I'm thinking of who came in to write postcards because another woman friend of hers encouraged her to do it. Then she started making phone calls. By the end of the campaign, she was knocking doors. And it is this power that we have with each other to support each other and to get what makes each other tick, I think, but to really push each other as far as we can to do the things that we know we are capable of. We just need to see ourselves doing it.
Anybody else? We need to kind of move on now to some Q&A, if not, okay. So as you came in, you apparently were given a little ticket. So I'm going to read the last 3 digits for the first 2. There's a microphone over here and a microphone over here that you can come up and ask your question. We'll start with 2. So at random, let's see here. Last 3 digits of this one, 566 and 538.
Mike down there.
What can we do about global warming?
Senator Warren?
So thank you very much for the question, and you are right to be concerned. This is about the world that you will inherit, and everyone in this room has a moral responsibility to take care of it so that you will have a world where you can breathe the air and drink the water, and it will be sustainable. America plays a leadership role. We always have and we always will, particularly in the climate area. The problem right now is we're leading in the wrong direction. So we got to turn this around. We've got to have somebody in the White House, somebody who leads our government, who says America's going to set the best example, not the worst example. And that really means that we join again the Paris Climate Accord, but that's just the first step. The things that have gone wrong with our Earth right now can't be fixed by just a single change. This is one of those times when it's going to take all of us. It's going to take all of us to make changes and make changes in the laws at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level. It's going to take all of us to change what we do so that we can protect our Mother Earth. So let me just say to you, what we need are people who understand that, who think that government should not be working for giant oil companies and coal companies, but think that government should be working for you. If we do that, we can save this earth.
Hi. Thank you so much for being here.
And one of the things that I'm concerned about as we go into the 2020 election is how we talk to one another. And I wanted to get your thoughts on how we confront someone like a Donald Trump or others who really are kind of going as low as they can. I think there's a perspective that it doesn't always work to go high with someone who is willing to do sort of whatever it takes. But I'm also concerned about the example that sets for our children. So just like your perspective on that.
Sure. So it's a great question. Let me start by saying, I mentioned earlier, I grew up in Oklahoma. I have 3 older brothers. They are all back in Oklahoma now, in 3 different towns close to each other. And one of my 3 brothers is a Democrat. I love all 3 of my brothers. And I talk with all 3 of my brothers. It's important to me to think about, as we move into this next place in our history, the direction of our country, it's important to me to think about what government is, what it means. Government should reflect our values. And so what I often try to talk about with all 3 of my brothers are just kind of those core things that we believe in, Republicans or Democrats. Look, I get it. There are a few people who don't, but let's take the ones we can. That we believe that all our kids should get an education. We want our kids to get an education. I get people take some terrible political moves around this, but if you keep driving back to that, they believe that it ought to be the case that it's a level playing field, that America should not be a country that just works for giant drug companies instead of people who are trying to get a prescription filled, that just works for giant financial companies instead of people who got their Social Security numbers stolen. That America needs to be a country that works for our values. So I see this going forward at the national level, this is a whole lot less about punching every day and a whole lot more about building every day, about getting out and talking about what we believe that we can do together. I think this is a moment in America when we can think big, when we can fight hard, and when we can make real change in this country. And that's the story we need to get out and tell. I think that's what's going to make the difference. Yeah, thank you.
We have time for one more, and that number is 475.
Hello, Senator and local representatives. My name is Nathaniel Gavronsky. For those of you that do not know me already, you will talk with me a lot in the next couple of months. I work mostly with constituent services involving people who are on a fixed income, people who are on Medicaid, Medicare, and people who just through economic means aren't able to survive here. Senator Warren, you worked on the consumer protections with banks against, the little man. But I would like to see some drive at the state level and the federal level to create a banking class the same way as they do with federal fixed income assets for investments, that for the people who least can afford it, people on fixed income have protections above and beyond what they're given right now, because when they're dealing with their last $20 and a late fee is $35 and they don't get paid for another month, you're destroying their ability to bank. And by using the credit scores to determine ability to rent an apartment, your automotive insurance rates, and to even be able to get a job Since '07 and '08 this has been going on. In Des Moines, I know of at least 300 people who, because of their lower incomes and their lower FICO scores, they can't get an apartment. And you're destroying people's ability to live life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I would like to have a response from as many as I can give them. Thank you.
So, thank you. It's a wonderful question. Let me just do a couple of quick points around this if I can. The first one is there are a lot of different ways that big banks can cheat people. Believe me, because I've seen a lot of them. There are a whole bunch of those. When the crash came in 2008, just remember what caused it. It happened one lousy mortgage at a time. One tricky mortgage, one mortgage somebody signed off on and didn't realize the payments would double 24 months later and that they would lose their home. An entire financial services industry, these big banks made billions of dollars off the backs of just hardworking folks all around this country. So when the time came to think about what are we going to do about it on the laws, I met with a lot of groups, and God bless them one and all that volunteer out there. Everybody had a thing they wanted to change. How interest rates are calculated on mortgages, what kind of disclosures you give, the paperwork on credit cards, payday loans, a lot of different pieces. The problem is you pass those laws, it's hard to get those laws passed. It takes a lot of energy. But you pass them, and then they're like fence posts on the prairie. Financial services industry just runs around them. You know, like payday loans, we'll call them Mayday loans. You know, we'll adjust a piece here and there. So how do you get real change? You get real change through structural change. And for me, that was the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. You give it a permanent home, you put a cop on the beat, and when the financial services industry figures out another way to cheat people, you got somebody there to be able to respond. It's about structural change in this economy. And I think it's structural change that we have to think about as we roll into 2020. Whatever issues bring you here today, whether it's the environment, whether it's guns, whether it's the problems of student loans, of middle-class families, of protecting our pensions, lots of different places where there are two things to pay attention to. The first one is we are not a deeply divided country on most of that. On those core economic issues, we pretty much believe 2/3, 3/4 of us want to see kids get some relief from student loan debt, want to see Social Security readjusted so it's secure forever into the future and pays a little better for people who depend on it, want to see affordable health care and health care where you can't cut people out with pre-existing conditions, want to see prescription drugs that people can actually afford. These are things we all, not all, but a huge proportion of us agree on. But there's a second part to it. You have to ask yourself, why doesn't it happen? Why hasn't it? We live in a democracy. There are a whole lot more people trying to fill a prescription than there are CEOs of big drug companies. So why are the big drug companies getting their way in Washington? Why has there not been any change in the laws? And the answer is corruption, pure and simple. We have a government that works for those at the top. We have a government that works for those who can afford an army of lobbyists, an army of lawyers, an army of bought and paid for experts. And we don't have a government that's working for the people. And we have a chance to change that as we roll into 2020. It's why I am so deeply optimistic when I come into a room like this. For a long, long time, the other side has had plenty of money to spend. They have had all of the advantages of tight organization. but there's a whole lot more of us than there is of them. And when we get organized, when we push back, we can make real change. People say, but it's hard, and it's going to be hard. I'm sitting with women who ran and lost and picked themselves up and ran again. We are Americans. We have gotten in these fights before. Everyone told the abolitionists, too hard, you can never make change, but they got in the fight. The suffragettes, they got in the fight. The labor movement, they got in the fight. The civil rights movement, they got in the fight. They were told, this is too hard, you can't do it. But the reality is they organized, they persisted, and they made real change in this country, and that's why.
So your voice is kind of going there, isn't it?
It is. Welcome to Iowa.
Do you have some closing remarks for us today?
I can. I want to end this where we started it, with all of the folks who make this happen, all the people who decided to jump in, you and me who thought never, never, but here we are, and all the people who said, you jump in and I'll help. I was thinking as you were talking about your PTO part of this, it's hard to make yourself credible when you first step out, because somehow you don't look like a state representative is supposed to look, or a United States senator is supposed to look. I still remember one of the very first events, you don't look like it, right? One of the very first events I went to, someone said to me with this huge skepticism, have you ever raised money before? Right? Because you've got to have money to fuel these campaigns. And I looked back and said, listen, Buster. I was getting pretty hot at this point. I was Girl Scout cookie chair. Two years running. But it's the reminder. This is what politics is about. This is what government is about, is that we draw on everything we are to bring us to this moment. This is about my mom and dad. This is about where I grew up. This is about every experience I've had and every time I've been told you can't get a consumer agency, a woman can't beat a popular Republican senator, you can't get the CEO of Wells Fargo fired. But that's what politics, that's what government is about in the 21st century. It's drawing on our values, it's drawing on who we are as human beings, and it's saying that this country, that this democracy is not a machine that will go of itself. It will only work if we are a part of it. I believe down to my toes in what we can do together. I believe that this is a moment when we will think big, we will fight hard, and we will make real change. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you for coming to Iowa.